Alright, so I'm going to be covering some of the basic aspects of percussion, and this is really just going to be a beginner's introduction to it because it can go pretty in depth. But basically, to start out with, most typical songs, pop songs, rock songs, things you hear on the radio, are going to be what's called 4/4 time. What that means is the top number, if you were to look at it on a sheet of music, the top four would be how many beats there are in a particular measure, and then the bottom number is the kind of note that receives one beat. So you don't really need to know that in particular, but all that's to say most songs are going to have four strong beats in each measure. And in the case of 4/4, the beats would be a quarter note. So I'm going to use FL Studio here to sort of give you a visual and auditory demonstration of how this plays out in actual music. So if you listen to a typical song, what you often hear, the most basic drum beat would be something like a kick drum, which would be the big sort of drum on the floor that's hit with a kick pedal, and then some sort of snare drum. Could be a hand clap, could be a snap or whatever. And the kick usually gives a strong accent, at least to the first beat. And then the snare is almost always going to be on beats 2 and 4. So to make sense of this, let me just play this right here. So that's a pretty typical percussion or drum pattern. You can see up here is the tempo. A tempo of a song is the speed of the song. So a lower tempo, let's say 60, would be 60 beats per minute. So if you have 4 beats in a measure, this is one measure right here, and the 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then repeat. And at 60 beats per minute, that means there's going to be 60 of those counts in a 1 minute span of time. So at 60 beats per minute, if you do the math, 60 beats per minute, and there's 60 seconds in a minute, that means there's going to be 1 beat every second. So this is actually, if you were to look at a watch, you would see 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. And if you were to double that into 120 for the tempo, then obviously it's twice as fast. And that means there's a beat every half second. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You're looking at a watch to break that down. So that'll help you determine the tempo. If you have a watch, you can look at it. And so obviously 60 beats per minute is a very slow tempo, usually only going to be for something like ballads. Anywhere up in the 70s to hundreds or so, it's going to be more of a laid-back groove, hip-hop, dance, funk. Once you get over 100, it can be into up-tempo songs up into 120. It can be upbeat dance music. It can be rock music. Usually the real high tempos up in the 160s and above. It's going to be a double time feel for some songs, or a very fast rock song, hard rock song, anything with a real driving in your face sort of feel. So that's the breakdown of tempo, and that's the breakdown of how you have 4 beats in any particular measure. So among any 4 beats, obviously you can switch around the kick pattern or whatever, but the most common thing you'll hear in any sort of pop music is the snare or a hand clap or a snap on beats 2 and 4. There's something about that just accenting those beats. So you can move the kick drum around anywhere you want, but you'll pretty commonly have that on beats 2 and 4. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you'll always have it, and different genres and styles of music will have different accents and where they place it, as well as different time signatures, but that's the most common thing. So I'm going to move the kick around here, and you'll still hear how it sounds good on beats 2 and 4 with the snare. Now if I were to move the snare to just like some sort of random beats, it's not going to have a good flow to it. Almost sounds like something in 3. Let's do this. It doesn't have a good groove to it at that point, so keeping that on beats 2 and 4. So you can pretty commonly determine where the measure begins based on where the snare is at, and also very commonly you would have the beginning of a measure, maybe every measure, maybe every 4 measures, or every section of a song. Somehow usually the beginning of the measures are going to be accented. So if it were a drum kit, they might have a crash cymbal on the start. So probably not every measure, but you can find where a pattern is beginning by where the accent tends to fall. So it can be the instruments providing the accent, the percussion, but usually the downbeat, the 1 of a measure, as it would be called, right along here if you're looking at this visually. If this is 1, 2, 3, and 4, the 1 is usually going to be accented. Once again, not always, and it depends on the style. And so now whenever you break it down, these would be considered quarter notes right here, where it changes colors. So quarter note 1, quarter note 2, quarter note 3, quarter note 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now if you get into eighth notes, this is dividing each beat in half. And a lot of music is going to be eighth note driven. Some music is 16th note driven, usually at a slower tempo. Things like funk music tend to be 16th note driven. Anything, some hip hop, rap music is 16th note driven. A lot of rock music, but also a lot of stuff, especially pop music, is eighth note driven. That means is you tend to have accents just basically what would look like every other thing here. The 1, and I would call that the and of 1, 2, and of 2, 3, and 4, and. So if I wanted to count along with that. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That gives you a breakdown. So if we were to, let's say, create a percussion pattern here, I could take any of these notes and just remove some of them at random and probably come up with a pretty decent beat. And what keeps that steady flow is, once again, that snare hits every time on beats 2 and 4. So that always sort of locks the groove in. Even if I were to take off the first note, it can still kind of carry a beat, but it sounds a little off unless you have a note right there. Now what 16th notes are they are a further subdivision of each beat. So if you have one beat, a beat here, and you divide it in half, you have the eighth note. So if that's a quarter note, I'm going to go into a piano roll, and this makes it a little easier. What you see here is that's beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, and beat 4. And you can see that lasts for one beat. It's a little bit different with percussion versus a melody instrument, but since I'm just covering percussion in this instance, it'll help to just see the visual nature of that being one beat. That's half of a beat. So you can fit another note in there, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. If we were to divide it even further into 16th notes, this is now 4 notes per each beat. So we can have 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 3 and 4, 1 E and 2, 3 and 4. So you can see how in 4 beats you can break it down You can have a note every beat. You can have a note 2 times in a beat. You can have a note 4 times within a beat. Once again, these are the 16th notes. And with 16th note grooves, especially at a slower tempo, you get more of the hip hop feel. So keeping that snare drum in place, you can take different 16th notes and let's put them in for the kick here. Different 16th notes, kind of placed in different locations. So what keeps that locked into a good groove is you have something steady on 3 and 4, which is the snare. So you can listen to songs. If you start listening to songs, you can often find where the snare or the clap or the snap or whatever they use is at. That's going to give away 2 and 4 most of the time, not all the time. And then the kick is just going to be in different locations depending on the type of groove that they want to give the song. So a typical hip hop groove would be something like this. 1E. So that's 1E and 1E and 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that gives the basic breakdown of how most pop, I'm just going to use pop as a generic term, most pop music breaks down like that in terms of your basic kick, snare, percussion patterns. And once again, if the kick is something like this, where it's going to be using these different types of 16th note patterns, you'll often have a hi-hat doing something 16th note based. However, if the has more of an 8th note feel, and it's just using the down beats, the down of 1, 2, 3, 4, and what would be called the off beats, which is the and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, then you might hear that they do something more 8th note based with a hi-hat. So you can hear the tempo stays the same, but that's an 8th note, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and it has more of that feel versus something like this, where we're using more of those 16th notes, the 1E and 2 and 3E and 4E and. So it gives it a totally different sort of groove, and once again the tempo stays the same, but we've just moved around some different stuff. So that's a really basic introduction to percussion and rhythm and how it works. Obviously, this is a very in-depth subject and really a study of music theory and rhythm. It also helps to see notation. A lot of drummers and people just sort of learn by ear, producers working in a program. But it does help to actually look at notation, study rhythm and music notation. But a simple thing that you can do is just start listening to pop songs or songs on the radio and listen for where they accent the beats 2 and 4, which is very common, and then how they emphasize the other notes around that, usually the 1 and then other sort of derivatives. Also try to hear if a song has a 16th note emphasized groove or an 8th note emphasized groove, which are going to be the 2 most common things. So that wraps it up for this basic video. If you have any comments, let me know. Thanks.